Artemis Fowl opens with a shot of Fowl Manor, which according to a Screen Rant article is a purpose-built real house in Surrey designed to last for a whole series of films and digitally placed on the Irish coast. The audio of various news reports fades in and continues as we see the media responsible for them reporting outside of the mansion. These shots are interspersed with the title cards, including a very plain logo for the film, simply Artemis Fowl written in white Operina Romano font on a plain black background. Compared to the logo in the original teaser trailer, which released in 2018, wherein the CGI gnomish letters rotated and twisted to form the words Artemis Fowl, it's terribly underwhelming. That trailer also consists almost entirely of scenes that did not make it into the final cut of the film at all, and very unfortunately points towards an original cut that may have been more enjoyable. We see shots of Mulch Diggums being transferred from a police car to a police van, while the news describes him as an accomplice of Artemis Fowl Sr., the museum thief that is the subject of all these overlapping reports. At less than 2 minutes in, the film is already diverging from the canon of the books, where Artemis Fowl Sr. is missing, presumed dead, after his ship is destroyed by the Russian mafia. This is, in my opinion, a bold move. The audience for a book adaptation can be divided into two groups. 1. Those who care about the source material, and 2. Those who don't. People in the second group cannot join the first group. By nature, if they don't care by the time they're watching the film, it's too late. And it's very hard to convert people in the first group into being people in the second group. Your film really needs to stand out. It can be done. How to Train Your Dragon doesn't particularly adhere to the plot of the books and still reviewed very well, but looking at reviews for Artemis Fowl tells an altogether opposite tale. While it may have been review bombed by people in Group 1, the critics do not like this film either, so it seems the plan to reject Group 1 in order to attract a wider, more lucrative Group 2 failed miserably. Mulch is taken to the Red Sands forts that are being used by MI6 as a base to interrogate people. We hear him speak for the first time as he explains that he isn't the brains of the operation, that would be the guy who stole the Aculos. At this point in the film, nobody should have any idea what that is, regardless of which group they fall into. He explains that it's a powerful and mysterious weapon, and that Artemis Fowl I is of little concern. The brains of the operation is Artemis Fowl II. It seems as though the Aculos is a wholly unnecessary MacGuffin. The plot of the book requires no change. Artemis Fowl kidnaps the fairy Holly Short and holds her to ransom for gold, which he intends to use to rebuild his family wealth that has diminished somewhat since the loss of his father. The inclusion of the Aculos only serves to muddy the story or to replace beloved parts, potentially changing Artemis's motivation from one of selfishness and greed to one of duress, heavily diminishing his character arc. If things just happened to him, rather than him choosing to do them, what reason is there for him to reevaluate and adjust his behaviour? Mulch's narration continues over shots of Artemis surfing. Our first look at the eponymous character, an introduction, and a bizarre one at that. His surfing talents are not called upon during the remainder of the story, and physical exertion is not something that represents his personality well. I can understand why a cynical mind may think this scene was included to spite people in Group 1, as in the book Artemis makes a point to shun exercise, holding it in very low esteem when compared to intellectual pursuits. I must stress that while negative, I do not possess that kind of cynicism, and thus remain simply baffled. Mulch's narration turns to the topic of Artemis's schooling, and hence we see him in the school. St. Bartleby's, to be precise, looking distinctly more modern than the full title St. Bartleby's School for Young Gentlemen, which is given in the books, would suggest. The brief shots of him raising his hand at every question asked while Mulch relays his achievements quickly establish that Artemis is indeed very smart, something I would rather have seen be demonstrated throughout the course of the movie rather than dumped on me at the beginning, where I'll just have to take it as given. There is little reason for Mulch to know or care about Artemis's school life, but I understand it provides the purpose of leading into the psychoanalysis scene, ripped relatively unchanged from the second book, but for one addition. Angeline Fowl, Artemis's mother, is dead. I understand the need to get her out of the way, allowing Artemis to conduct his business unobstructed, but in the book she was already out of the way, bedridden with illness. The film seems to be writing around roadblocks that it itself is laying, depriving Artemis of a chance of softening and redemption as he offers to return half of the gold in exchange for his mother's renewed health, and also dramatically altering any potential sequels that this film may have had. Without Angeline, there can be no Miles or Beckett Fowl, divesting Artemis of not only his mother, but also his future brothers. It is a Disney film, so I suppose I shouldn't be surprised they've killed another mother off. Where in the book Artemis terminates a session on his own terms, it seems in the film that he rather leaves after the uncomfortable mention of his parents in an uncharacteristic strop, that being the last we hear of Angeline altogether. On reflection, this renders the school and psychoanalysis scene pretty pointless. Throughout the books we learn of Artemis's intellect, and that his rather limited sense of humour is focused on the clever and the cruel, and are also offered explanation for why he's allowed to take time off school to research the whereabouts of his father and fairies fairies, order fruitless expeditions to find his father, and go fairy hunting himself, as we witness him lie to his mother about his location and forge notes to the school. With the events of the film taking place over such a comparatively short time, no living mother to worry about, no missing father to worry about, and fairy hunting missions yet to be mentioned, though might I add filmed and left on the cutting room floor, the scene is left quadruply aimless. Artemis returns home on a one-wheel, and we get the specific shot of him performing a stunt, prompting my level of cynicism to rise dramatically. Mulch's subsequent assertion that there's nothing Artemis likes more than spending time with his father pushes my cynicism to astronomical levels. We learn that it is Artemis I who has taught Artemis II about the existence of fairies, though presenting it all as folktale, having worked with Mulch and made use of his tunneling skills when committing his robberies. In isolation, this is fine, it makes sense, but it is not the story of Artemis Fowl, and it is not better than the story of Artemis Fowl, so I do not know why it exists in this movie. A feeling that's becoming already far too common. In fact, it seems that besides artifacts, Artemis I has also robbed his son of the chance to prove his Mensa membership and do what nobody else could, discovering the existence of fairies on his own. This also strips us of the poignant scene in which Artemis turns off the computer dedicated to trawling the net for any updates on his father's condition, dedicating the resources to decoding the Book of the People instead. Without the scenes of Artemis interacting with his parents or lack thereof, including the one in which his own mother fails to recognise him, his character's starting to come across as a lot more flat than his literary counterpart. Artemis I has to skedaddle, presumably to escape criminal prosecution, much to his son's dismay, leaving him seemingly alone. This is actually the perfect time to show that he's not alone. Introduce Butler perhaps, and they do, so props to him, but not before we see him wake up in a bedroom surrounded by strikingly normal toys. Artemis is not a normal kid. He has no want of normal toys. He dons a suit every day, one that we're yet to see, and spends so much time hunched over a CRT his skin has a deathly pallor, which, paired with a slick-back widow's peak, not replicated in the film, gives him a vampiric appearance. He's shockingly articulate for a 12-year-old and is not supposed to be relatable in the slightest, and yet is also just like me for real. He's every child who was put on the smart kids table and developed a superiority complex, and the point of the book, the point of the whole series, is how that is not a sustainable way to be. You should recognise people for their talents and accept that emotions have a value. And Artemis, who is more of the everyman, may be a better vehicle through whose eyes a broader audience can see, but he is an Artemis who has nowhere to go, and crucially, when the film does try to then tell us he's the guy from the books all along, there's this terrible, unpleasant crash of incongruity. Another incongruous subject is Butler, though apparently we shouldn't call him Butler, who we first see having a panicked phone call. His eyes stunningly blue, and his hair bizarrely white. We're told that his name is Domovoy Butler, and that to call him Butler would get you snapped in half, despite the express opposite being true in the books. Perhaps this is because they've cast Nonso Anozie, a black Nigerian man, in his role, and it may draw some attention to the dodgy vibes of a guy whose family has supposedly served these very rich white guys for generations, if they refuse to even use his first name. It may have been interesting for the film to explore that aspect of the Fowl's generational wealth, but I'm really just being facetious. There is a time and a place, and it doesn't have to be within 90 minutes of children's fantasy entertainment. Maybe they could have avoided this issue by instead casting Holly, who is a person of colour, well, elf of colour, in the books more accurately to how she is described, but I'm trying to reserve my opinions for her for when she actually shows up. Instead, Disney's tried to paper over it in another display of steamrolling anything that may have been setting the series up for a well-deserved franchise. You see, altogether now, in the books, specifically Book 3, there's a point at which Butler believes he's going to die, and thus reveals his previously unknown first name to Artemis. It's emotional. It's powerful that when he, spoiler alert, doesn't die, he has to trust Artemis with that knowledge, and I guess we won't ever see that happen now. Artemis comes downstairs and is greeted by a news report, learning that his father's mysterious trips away coincide with the thefts of multiple precious artifacts, and also that the man has gone missing from his boat found abandoned in the sea. Both the ticker and the news audio identify the boat as the Owl Star. In the books it's the Fowl Star, and is the one blown up by the Mafia. The names are too similar for it not to have been changed intentionally, and the change is entirely inconsequential, so it makes me wonder why it was changed at all. It's distracting, to say the least. Screaming aloud, and you should know by now that's out of character for him, at the suggestion that his dad could maybe have been up to no good, Artemis hears the phone ring and sprints to answer it. Sprints. Believing it could be the old man reassuring him he's okay. The voice, of course, belongs to Opal Cowboy, plucked from the second book in the continued mangling of this film's plot. She announces she's the one who has kidnapped Artemis Sr., as he stole the Aculus from her and she wants it back. He's being held, funnily, as a kind of ransom chip. She wants Artemis Jr. to bring her the Aculus within 3 days or he'll never see Daddy again, thus confirming her place as the film's primary antagonist. This, by right, should make her a main character, but I genuinely forgot that she was even in the movie. That's not me trying to be mean. That's just the objective truth. To be fair though, she's not in it all that much. This might have something to do with the fact that she's credited as 3 people. It doesn't bode well if your actor ups and leaves twice, but maybe this is normal. Maybe one was the voice, one was the body, and the other was moral support. I don't know, and it's unlikely that I ever will. I say Opal was underutilised, but really she shouldn't be here at all, and it's a massive shame. Also, she's an idiot. Her plan is to kidnap the one guy who knows where the Aculos is, and then get his family member who doesn't to find it. Surely it'd make more sense to do the opposite way round and use the young'un as the means of getting Big Artie to cough up. Our guy doesn't even know what the Aculos is, and when he asks, he's just told to figure it out. Opal, you're the one who wants it. You should be giving him all the information you possibly can. This isn't on purpose, this isn't some character flaw, this is just bad. While most of the choices in the film are weird or can be explained away by unfortunate circumstances, I have no sympathy for the writers having the book with the perfect plot in front of them, having the film delayed by months before COVID was even a thing in order to make it better, and still turning in this. At some point, you just have to say they didn't do a good job. Artemis tells Butler what he heard on the phone, and Butler takes him to the mansion's secret basement. Inside the basement, we learn that Artemis the Elder has been stealing fairy artifacts to keep them safe or out of the wrong hands, so actually is a paragon of moral virtue, and that he's been saving it all up to tell Artemis the Younger when he was old enough, but that he also left a contingency plan, should this day ever come, by concealing a code within the Irish blessing that he'd recount to his son each night, so that said son can discover his hidden journal within a particular drawer to find out what on, or under, the earth is going on. Side note, I'm running out of ways to verbally distinguish the two Artemises, and Owen Culver had the right idea when he decided to get one of them out of the way. I've banged on enough about how it's better for Artemis to discover fairies himself rather than be told about them, but I do want to raise a point that is made in the books about Artemis's unique position. He's intelligent far beyond his years, but is also a 12-year-old with an imagination, and it's giving into this imagination and being willing to believe that fairies exist that allows him to hunt them down. There's something to be said for not letting go of your sense of childhood wonder as you grow into the stuffy, rigid adult world, a message I thought Disney built their whole brand around, but one that is very much forgotten in this film as Ferdia delivers his cliché dialogue without any hint of interest. Sorry, Ferdia, it seems a bit mean to go after a kid at the time, so I'm going to lay off it, but it is just a little painful to watch. We transition to Haven City while Mulch spews propaganda about it, and then we do another transition from the obvious CGI environment to an obvious set piece, but I can't spot the cut. It's really well done. See, I don't hate everything about this film. The Mulch propaganda isn't a joke though. The Haven City of the books is astoundingly technologically advanced for the era it's in, but also grimy, parts are underfunded, overcrowded, run down. It's relatable. It helps its very non-human residents feel human. The Haven of the films is only ever shown to be as beautiful, wondrous and thriving as Mulch says it is, which is way less interesting. I keep comparing it to the books because it's a book adaptation obviously, but also because I know this film is meant to entertain kids, not 22-year-olds. The books are aimed at that same age range, so if the books can do it, I want to know why the film can't. Kids aren't stupid, they can appreciate good book writing and good filmmaking if you let them. So I just wish that I could be seeing what I enjoyed reading so much. We see Holly hop off the ferry equivalent of a bus, though it does help that we can hear the audio from her earpiece refer to her by name, because last I read, Holly Short was a fully grown woman with nut brown skin. What I'm seeing before me is a young white girl. That ain't cool. It's an issue that's been going on for years on book covers, but that doesn't make it okay. And look, I get it. Fairy aging is weird, so she looks 16, but she's really nearing 100, and that makes it totally okay for you to write creepy things about her on the internet. But she doesn't just look 16, she acts 16 because you cast a 16-year-old. The Holly of the books is competent and experienced, if reckless, and the film will either throw all that out the window, spoilers, that's the one it does, or try to convince me that Book Holly is standing before me with a baby face. You can't even tell me that they've cast a kid for height reasons, because you've got short adults like Judi Dench playing fairies, and try to explain away Josh Gad's height difference compared to all the other dwarves with jokes and a contrived plot point. Making her way through the throngs of fairies, we see a news report that down in Haven, Beechwood Short is the prime suspect for the disappearance of the Aculos, before Holly bumps into Mulch, who is being loaded into fairy prisoner transport this time. He ends up managing to pocket her music player. Over in some kind of cage, perhaps a prison cell, we're introduced to a disgraced former fairy commander, Briar Cudgeon. Opal Cowboy tells him that she's pulled some strings and he's free to go. Root didn't like it, but there was nothing she could have done, and now, in exchange for his freedom and on pain of death, Cudgeon will work as a spy for Opal. Back in Haven, Holly turns up for work just in time for a speech from Judi Dench as Commander Root. Her accent is... well, I'm not Irish, I have no connection to Ireland besides maybe one distant relative, and it seems that Dench's mother was from Dublin, so it could be spot on for all I know, but as far as I can tell, no other actor has put on an Irish accent for the film, so she sticks out like a sore thumb. She's so incredibly gruff, on par with Mulch actually, which maybe could have been explained away if she was seen chain-smoking cigars a la the book interpretation, but I can't imagine Disney wants this more sympathetic version of the character to be engaged in any negative imitable behaviour, and that's the real issue. She's more sympathetic because she's a woman. I'm about as lefty snowflake soy boy beta SJW woke as you can imagine. I'm totally down for a bit of gender bending, but I also like a good story. In the books, Root is a sexist. He treats Holly differently and is unfairly harsh on her because she's a woman, the first and only woman to have made it to the rank of Lower Elements Police Captain. He justifies his actions by saying that because of her unique status, she's going to be scrutinised by everybody who will pick her apart at the slightest hint of weakness, so he needs to hold her to this impossible standard. Through him, the readers can learn that nobody thinks they're the villain. The bad guys always think they're the good guys, but just because you can back it up doesn't mean what you're doing is right. A big message to give to a 12-year-old. I haven't read the books in full in a while, so it's possible they don't push this message home as much as I'd have liked, but the film is a prime opportunity to do just that. Instead, they disengage entirely. This fairy society is a post-sexist one, where women are able to lead as well as men. Did Judi Dench's version of Root face immense struggles to get where she is today? We'll never know, because they never say. It's not like this casting is providing more opportunities to get women on screen either. Judi Dench has an IMDb as long as your arm. This is about the prioritisation of star power at the detriment of that good story. Root briefs the lip, driving home the point that the Actlos being gone is bad, so they better all go looking for it, but also not get caught by the humans, thank you very much. Kaijin is seen looking in and is noticed by Holly, who has a question for Root. Perhaps due to her age, this Holly is meek. She's arguably the second most main character. If Artemis is a representative for humans, she's a representative for fairies, and gets chapters of book dedicated to seeing through her perspective. For both of these characters' personalities to be so dramatically shifted just makes me sad. Her question is, hey, I think I know where my dad might be, so can I please go look for him, please? Root literally says, no, you're too young, and also you shouldn't be making missions personal. Back in Ireland, Butler knows things are going to get serious, so calls him back up, consisting of his niece, Juliet. I've no idea why she's his niece and not his sister like she should be. My only suggestion is it's so they can age her down more easily so she can better relate to Artemis, but all that goes out the window because she basically brings him a sandwich and isn't really seen again. Sure, in the first book, Juliet is possibly the least important character. She's kind of the guinea pig that Holly can use her mesmerising powers on to show that she can be a threat. This adaptation, that had the chance to make her more integral, somehow gives her even less to do. And the sandwich doesn't even look that great. It's a whole lot of salad with some flavourless looking cheese. I wouldn't have brought it up, but it amuses me because as well as being a tremendous bodyguard, the butler of the books is also a professional chef, and I'm sure he wouldn't let that stand. As Artemis taps away on his Alienware laptop, he comes to the conclusion he's got no idea where the Actlos is, but maybe the fairies can help him find it. The laptop is another thing I wouldn't have mentioned if not for the fact that Owen Colfer went out of his way to specify in the books that he's got a Mac. I can't be certain, but I think I heard that a bit of money needs to change hands, or at the very least some extra effort needs to be expended to clear brand names for use in books. So Owen really wanted us to know that Artie's an Apple guy. The films don't care. Maybe it's product placement, I don't know if they have to declare that or where I'd find such a declaration, but something about Artemis having gamer-branded tech instead of an Apple Mac doesn't feel quite right. And that's the thing, Owen doesn't say Mac at all, it's always Apple Mac or Macintosh or PowerBook. Why? Because it's set at the turn of the millennium, and our boy is decked out with the latest late 90s gear. There's a reason I said hunched over a CRT earlier. When you think about it, a major plot point of Book 3 is how Artemis has used the fairy tech to develop a portable supercomputer to sell to humanity. When you read the description of it, it's not too much more than a contemporary smartphone. Setting matters. In 2022, Artemis Fowl is at least 10 years older than me, not younger, and the decision to scooch the timeline along annoys me for personal reasons, because I was born in 2000. I grew up through the setting of the Artemis Fowl books, and I'm the last generation to have listened to the screeching of dial-up and whose first phone didn't come preloaded with some kind of smart assistant. I want a film set in that era with its music and its fashion and its dodgy web UI. Disney clearly doesn't, and I'll have more to say on that later, just you wait. Artemis also comes to the conclusion that the fairy language is darned hard to decipher. If there's two things that are pretty iconic from the first book for me, it's Artemis deciphering the Gnomish and the butler versus troll fight. Later, just you wait. As a nerdy kid, deciphering a language was really cool. It's made of symbols that don't really correspond to any modern alphabet, so you can't start there. How about hieroglyphs then? Yeah, there seems to be some kind of resemblance, the implication being that fairies are really damn old, and before they were forced underground by us horrible Homo sapiens, they intermingled in human culture. Feed it through a hieroglyphic translator and you still get gibberish, and it takes a while to figure out that the script is written and read in a kind of squarish spiral pattern. So, taking a craft knife to the pages, Artemis cuts them up and rearranges them. With a bit of reinterpretation to better fit the context, he has the key to fairy communication in his hands. Yeah, we don't see that. He instead declares that the language is encoded, and Mulch chimes in as we pop back down underground that it was Foley what encoded it. That's a kind of weird statement to make. It's a language. If he encoded the language, then I assume he must have invented the language? And maybe in this world he did, good for him. But the line is far too throwaway for us to get any more depth. Oh, Foley. Foley, Foley, Foley. Played by Nikesh Patel prancing around on some stilts to really get the centaur movement down, and I do honestly really appreciate that level of effort. It's just a shame that this film's only prominent character to be played by a South Asian actor is in tech support. As far as stereotypes go, you could argue it's a flattering one. He's intelligent, but it still contributes to typecasting in an industry where the white people can be anything, including taking leading roles that should have gone to brown actors, though I put the blame on the casting directors and not Laura McDonnell. And people of colour are still more likely to be support and servitude. What's the solution then? Get rid of him? Hell no, just actually have some consideration for who you're casting rather than going full hands-off colourblind mode. Have some more actors from Asia in a diverse set of roles representing the diversity of real people. It's not too hard. As for the character himself, he's in a great position, responsible for most of the Lep's tech thanks to his big brain. He's pretty indispensable. This allows him to wind up, challenge and face Root's wrath without any real fear of retribution. Of course, not in the film, though. He's also incredibly paranoid to the point of wearing a tinfoil hat. This is mostly played for laughs, and I do think it's the right call that after 2 decades of societal advances, teasing folk for their potentially very serious mental health issues is an element that can be safely scrapped. But what do we get instead? Nothing. He's kind of devoid of personality, if anything a yes man. It seems like he's just there so fans can go, "Hey, it's Foley, I know that guy," without actually getting anything from it. He announces that someone from down below is up on the surface unaccounted for. He doesn't know who or what species they are, just that they're big and this is a serious matter. This could reveal the existence of fairy kind. With most everyone else off searching for the Aculos, the job to go and observe but not engage gets given to Holly, and off she pops into a pod to head on up, far more outwardly nervous about the lava-based travel than the Holly I know and love would be. Root gives the explicit order that Holly is to stay shielded when up there. Total invisibility. Cudgeon pops up to disapprove of all this. Holly is the daughter of Beechwood Shaw. Beechwood is a traitor to fairy kind for absconding with the Aculos, and what's more, it happened under Root's watch. Holly flies over a town in what I assume and is later confirmed to be Italy, in full view of everybody, unshielded. Nobody seems to notice, and nothing seems to come of it, so I don't know what's up with that. I just don't know. She spots the escaped fairy, a troll, attacking a wedding celebration. It picks up a girl and throws her, and Root advises Holly not to use magic on a human to heal her. Holly ignores this, heals the girl, ties up the troll in a string of lights, and then a time freeze is authorised so the other officers can come in and secure the troll and wipe the memories of everyone who saw something. Holly is commended for her good work by Root and told to return home. This scene in the books does multiple things at once. It shows Holly's willingness to help others, treating the first cry for help she hears as the invitation needed to access a human dwelling. It introduces the idea of the invitation, which is something Artemis later relies on when facing down the fairies, and it highlights Holly's recklessness insofar as that she's not made time to perform the ritual that gives fairies their magic, leading the encounter with the troll to not go to plan, setting in motion the actions that explain what she's doing in Ireland when she gets caught by Artemis. The film has mixed and matched the situation, so instead uses it as a chance to introduce the time stop. But even this isn't quite right. In the books, everything within a time stop is isolated from the outside, seeming to progress as normal while the outside world is frozen. This allows the fairies to, say, stretch out the last few minutes of the cover of darkness to several hours. Very beneficial. In the film, it seems to be the opposite. Everything inside the time stop stops, freezing everyone in place and allowing the Lep to come in and round up the troll. While different, this would be fine if it was consistent. But we'll see later that's not the case. Holly, seeing that she has the opportunity to fly about on the surface with nobody to stop her, heads over to Ireland to find her father. If you wanted to get her over to Ireland, you could have gone with the explanation in the books. It's better in my opinion because it removes the coincidence that of all the places Artemis could have gone to capture a fairy, he goes to the one place that the daughter of the fairy that was working with his dad happens to be at. How convenient. Holly is a lot more random in the books. It could have been anyone, and she isn't captured so quickly. It takes 4 months. It's clear that while Butler would never disobey Artemis's wishes, he's getting pretty fed up with the whole ordeal, which has a nice layer of believability for me. But, you know, we don't get that on screen. Instead, we get Artemis reading more of his father's journals, learning that Opal Cowboy is a big baddie with generic evil intentions who shouldn't get her hands on the Aculos, rather than a scheming mastermind engineering a civil war so that she might rise to power, which is far more interesting, like everything in the books is. And then the scene of Artemis and Butler capturing Holly as she touches down at the Hill of Tara. The timing's a bit odd with this one. It doesn't appear to take Holly all that long to fly from Italy to Ireland, but in that time Artemis goes from being at home, reading journals and contacting Butler by phone, to being present at the capture with him. We aren't shown the intervening travel, which is fine, I'm capable of just assuming it happened, but the order of the scene shown to us does make it all appear to happen at light speed. Holly notices a name tag from her father after not much looking at all, and then is fired on with a tranquilizer from Butler. Artemis is the one who is ordering to fire, despite Butler being the one who is looking through the scope and would know when to take the shot himself. Possibly the order isn't genuine tactical advice and is just born of Artemis's excitement, but the Artemis of the books would know how capable Butler is and never let himself get so carried away. Foley, Root et al. See Holly get captured and conclude that she must have been taken to Fowl Manor, as it's the only real human habitation nearby. I'd argue that anyone could have flown in from anywhere across the globe to capture a fairy, but it seems that Root has some history with Fowl Manor. Cudgeon continues to taunt. Holly wakes up in a cage inside the manor and says 2 words, "Not happy," which is a very quick and succinct way of letting us know how she's feeling, I suppose. Artemis recalls his father teaching him about the tunnelling capabilities of dwarves, and that fairies have the ability to basically hypnotise people if they can just look into their eyes. Knowing now that fairies exist, so all this is true, we see Artemis's kitted Juliet out in some mirrored sunglasses as she delivers Holly some food this time. 2 slices of buttered bread, an apple, and a plate that appears to hold some diced yellow pepper, cherry tomatoes and rocket. She acknowledges that she doesn't know what fairies eat, but maybe it's salad, as the mesmer fruitlessly attempted on her by Holly, which means the mesmer may as well not have been in the film altogether as it never works, and then leaves as Artemis enters. I really can't imagine that she gets more than 2 minutes of screen time total. Artemis, who we assume is supposed to be seeking Holly's help in this version of the story, instead smugly antagonises her, revealing that he can read the gnomish name tag on her helmet, as he must have cracked through that pesky encryption and familiarised himself with the language off-screen. He hints that the fairies coming to rescue her is something that he has accounted for, and is actually anticipating. There's a further scene of Mulch's interrogation, where he seems very willing to hand over all this info about fairies to MI6, but we don't learn an awful lot of anything new, and then we see a time-stop device being deployed out of what I assume is the Irish Sea. Butler very dramatically exclaims that the storm rolling in is like the world is ending, and Artemis explains to him, in a very obviously ADR scene, that it's all a result of the time stop the fairies are setting up. Practically every scene in a film is ADR'd, but the audience isn't supposed to be able to tell. We saw no such effect on the weather when the time stop was previously deployed in Italy, but perhaps it's due to the larger target area. I don't know, and I simply have to guess because I'm not being provided with the relevant information. Artemis arms Butler with a weapon that he's taken off Holly. It's a kind of neat if generic sci-fi machine that can morph itself to either become a kind of sword or a gun and compactly pack itself away. It's in the next scene, as we see Foley setting up the time freeze, wibbling his hands around on some kind of holographic desk, that the film grinds to a halt. Literally, the frame rate of the film drops. This is different to slow motion, where the frame rate would remain constant, but footage shot at a higher rate would be shown, extending that footage out over a longer time. No, in this scene, we go from the footage being displayed at, I imagine, 24 FPS, which is enough to fool our eyes into believing we're seeing motion, to looking like a slideshow. This can't be done for stylistic reasons, but it really does not fit the scene, prompting me to believe it's an error. Now, I'm an entirely upstanding citizen who definitely gave Disney money in order to watch this film, but if I weren't, then I may not have had a means of verifying that any perceived technical issues I'd experienced were really the filmmaker's fault. But I don't even need to worry about that, because it's all been testified to me by other people who have watched this film and experienced the same thing. I need to clarify, I know next to nothing about visual effects and CGI, so I'm going to start speculating, and as I do, please keep in mind that I really hope that I'm wrong. Visual effects are rendered during the filmmaking process. They're not generated by the device you're watching the film on like would be done if you were playing a video game, but they've already been done by the combination of VFX studios that Disney outsources the process to. This means that something must have gone wrong in the filmmaking process, and they were left with no ability to fix it. I fear that this is due to horrible time mismanagement. The only way that this must have been allowed to go through is if these scenes were made at the absolute last minute. And with the film having been given extra time, as I previously mentioned, funnily enough it does remind me of the development process of a particular video game, namely Cyberpunk. The time stop is deployed and we witness everything outside of the bubble seem to stop as the inside is insulated. I, who love book accuracy, I'm in fact left wondering why they didn't use the other kind of time stop that we saw earlier in the film. It's been established that they can freeze everything on the inside, waltz in and extract people. Why not do that exact thing freeze Artemis and Butler where they stand, and get Holly out of there. There wouldn't be much of a film left if they did, but Root's motivation isn't to extend the film, it's to rescue Holly. And the only reason I'm left wondering why they aren't taking the far easier route, the only reason I'm left wondering why they aren't taking the far easier route is because they wrote an entirely unnecessary one in, weakening the entire premise. It's the sort of issue that would occur in a first draft, and you'd imagine would be quickly noticed and revised, but here it makes it all the way to screen. As the fairies all fly in and land on the beach near Fowl Manor, we see Root piloting a ship in a head-on view. The camera swivels round to the right, and Root turns her head to look out of the window to the right. Her eyes don't quite meet the camera, and any accusations of her breaking the fourth wall are perhaps overzealous, but we do wonder what behind the camera she's looking at. We don't get to see it. At pretty much the halfway point into the film, Artemis dons his iconic suit for the first time. We get a shot of it, zooming in, but we don't even get a zoom into the back of the suit, and then when you zoom out you're somewhere else transition. I've long feared an Artemis Fowl film, actually. I think the idea of a 12-year-old in a suit wandering around is kind of ridiculous. It's hard to take seriously, it reminds me of a school uniform. The combination of Owen Colfer's writing and the power of imagination make it work. If you're told he doesn't look like a dork and looks really sharp, you can imagine him looking sharp, but when it's brought to screen it's pretty hard to override the visual input. I think third year looks fine, maybe it helps that he was a tad older at the time of shooting, but the character of Artemis Fowl has been so beaten out of this interpretation that by the time he cuts a silhouette that fans recognise, I find it just so hard to care. He's got his suit on, what did he do? What massively out of character things is he going to get up to wearing that? Root orders an advance team to enter the grounds of Fowl Manor. Butler and Artemis step out to greet them, and the fairy seems slightly perplexed that they appear unarmed. Suddenly, Artemis calls out, "Take the shot!" Butler does not in fact take the shot. Pulling Holly's Omni weapon from his pocket with a spin for added flair, he enables its shield mode, harmlessly deflecting the fairy's hail of energy blasts. What follows is a chaotic and poorly edited fight scene. The shield goes down and Butler is grappling with a fairy, seemingly from nowhere. The weapon is mysteriously in Artemis's hands, and he's providing covering fire. The grappling and fighting continues until Butler gets the chance to transform the weapon into a bow and shoot an arrow right into the Time Freeze capsule. It doesn't take it down immediately, but Foley informs us the fairies need to hasten their plan as they don't have long. When compared to the clever and deeply in-character way of escaping the Time Freeze that is used in the books, wherein Artemis discovers they interact with states of consciousness and experiments on his mother with sleeping pills, it seems like a very easy way out by comparison. Artemis demands that the fairies send in a negotiator as Butler rounds up the soldier types and escorts them away. At this point, it's not certain why Artemis is being so aggressive. The fairies have just been acting in response to his provocation of the situation. He's neglected to explain the situation to Holly, rejecting the idea of any attempt at gaining her sympathy, and while in the book his motivation to hold her ransom for gold is clear, here he has no reason to not try and resolve things peacefully, which makes him come across as more dislikable than the book version that Disney seems so scared we'd hate, despite, the obvious fan base that he already had behind him. We get a scene where Opal explains her plan to Artie Sr., because villains can't resist a good gloat, which is to use the Aculos to kill humanity in revenge for us forcing them underground however many thousand years ago. Root nominates herself as negotiator and turns up at the manor door. Artemis says he invites her in, to which she replies, "Nice try." This interaction is pretty odd, as until now the whole concept of fairies requiring invitations to enter human dwellings has been absent from the film. In the books, if a fairy enters a human dwelling without an invitation, they become violently ill, and the repeated violation of this rule causes them to lose their magic altogether. The illness is how the fairies discover Artemis has escaped the time stop, as they believe they've killed him, waltz on in, and then vomit inside their helmets. The whole idea to even attempt to kill him with the introduction of the troll and later a bomb is in fact planted in their heads by Artemis, as he says they may not enter while he's alive. And I have a fond memory of two characters being introduced to argue the semantics of whether being denied access while he lives implies being allowed access when he's dead, or whether the two are unrelated. The eventual loss of magic is also why Mulch is relevant to the story at all. As a thief, he's foregone his magic in exchange for breaking into dwellings, relying instead on his natural tunnelling ability. He's brought in order to try and infiltrate Fowl Manor in exchange for a reduced sentence. All that suggests that Root would be happy for an open invitation to gain access to speak to Artemis, and her dismissing it as a trick with no further explanation of the rules in this version of the story is confusing. Root does enter, and they sit down to negotiate, establishing that she does know the Fowls and is particularly concerned with the senior, who she identifies as a thief. She gives the junior an ultimatum. Return Holly, or the house and everyone inside will be destroyed. Artemis says that if they make any move to do so, he'll reveal fairy existence to the world. With the time stop collapsing around them, he'll soon be free to send messages to anyone outside, so they've got about 27 minutes to get destroying, or they're all pretty screwed. Alternatively, he'll free Holly if they bring him the Aculos in one of those pots from under a rainbow, I presume. That's a weird sentence, isn't it? A kind of sarcastic ribbing at a leprechaun who would be known for hiding something in a pot at the end of a rainbow. What is it that leprechauns hide in pots at the end of rainbows? Oh, that's right. Gold. Hey, that's funny. Artemis was after gold in the books, but in the movie he's after the Aculos, so that must just be a coincidence. Pay no attention to the fact that the film cuts away to the back of Artemis's head when he says Aculos, so we can't see his mouth move. I'm sure that's just a coincidence too. Artemis sends Root away to ruminate, actually saying that if she's going to conclude on storming the place, that nobody may enter while he's alive. Sheesh, if this film had spent the earlier troll scene establishing the invitation, rather than a useless extra time stop, like a certain other form of media that the story takes did, it would be a whole lot smoother. This forces the Lep's hand, and Root calls for Mulch, who is residing in prison listening to I Want to Know What Love Is on the music player that he swiped from Holly, who I can only assume got it from her dad when he was interacting with Artemis Sr. smuggling out fairy artifacts. Presumably that'd be quite a sentimental item, but Holly doesn't seem to notice that it's gone. Mulch has a bit of an altercation in prison with some goblins, which is true to the books and quite nice to see. I enjoy the detail of the goblins seemingly ejecting flammable liquid from their noses so that they ignite with their mouths. He jams his fingers up one's nose, makes it explode, and then is called away to hop on the next pod up to the surface. Artemis goes to speak to Holly again, who understandably thinks he's far too cocky, swanning about in his suit, thinking he's being oh so clever, treating a kidnapping like a game. Artemis says that it isn't a game to him actually, his own father was kidnapped, and he's doing this for him. Again, I say there's probably far less convoluted ways. The majority of fairy kind doesn't want to wipe out the humans, they're not all leaping at the chance to side with Cowboy. She said herself that most thought that she was mad. If Artemis could just establish that they've got a common enemy, he'd have a fair chance of teaming up with the fairies against her. I know that's not the story that they're trying to tell here, but they aren't trying to tell the story of Artemis Fowl either, so if they're willing to bend the plot so much, I wonder why they've settled on a shape where everyone in it seems to be acting so weird. A prime example is what happens next, where Holly replies to Artemis's statement that his father is kidnapped with My father is dead, which I've just realised is a huge assumption to make based on the total evidence being a lost name tag. Blimey, Holly. Artemis then asks if he can trust her. She says he doesn't have a choice, and they become friends to the point that Artemis willingly removes his sunglasses and Holly doesn't use the mesmer on him. What on earth did I just watch? The scene begins at 52:19, and Artemis removes his glasses at 52:53. 34 seconds to go from enemies to friends. There are plenty of ridiculous moments in this film, but that has to take the biscuit. It is awful to watch. They spend a further less than minute bonding as Holly explains that her dad was ambushed and killed by another fairy for nicking the Aculos. He was branded a criminal but was just trying to keep it safe. All of which, I must stress, she has gleaned from picking up a name tag, as before she picked it up she wanted to go and find him, believing he was alive, and then after she picked it up she was put in a cage. Artemis says that folk have also been branding his dad a criminal, when he just wanted to keep dangerous artifacts safe. And what a coincidence that the two guys work together, and what a departure from the Artemis I of the books, who is a genuine criminal inspired by his ordeal in Russia to start going straight. Mulch arrives, is spotted by Juliet, and checks in with Root. There's a bit of banter. Mulch lampshades that nobody in the film seems to know Root's first name, and also compares her to David Bowie, asking if the humans know he was a fairy. I think the joke is fine, but I feel the need to read out a very short, very sarcastic review I happened upon. Quote, I enjoyed the bit where they called David Bowie a slur. End quote. I don't think this film has captured the humour of the books very well at all. Mulch tunnels with his mouth, ingesting the dirt, processing it very quickly, and ejecting it out the other end. In the books this leads to a lot of fart jokes, and there's even a moment where Butler is blown off his feet by Mulch's expulsions. It's crude and isn't exactly going to have 22-year-old me in stitches, but the book is aimed at a younger audience that this sort of humour appeals to. It's just gross enough to be that kind of harmless taboo that kids love. I shouldn't be reading about a guy farting out dirt in another guy's face, that's rude, but I am, tee. But within all that, it also serves a purpose. Butler is literally knocked unconscious, taking him out of the action and stopping him from easily preventing what happens next. Thought has gone into it. In the film, every joke seems like an afterthought tacked on, which is just disappointing. In possibly the most memed, most famous bit of this film, Mulch unhinges his jaw and tunnels in. I even used it for another thumbnail. I don't mind how it looks. Someone unhinging their jaw and inhaling vast quantities of dirt while they tunnel their way through the earth with their face is horrific, and I enjoy being slightly horrified by the glimpses of terrible teeth that I get while we shaky cam our way through the ground. He pops out in the mansion, Holly, Artemis and Butler all instantly aware of his presence due to his loud belching, and within seconds he's located a safe behind a painting thanks to the X-ray iris camera that he's been equipped with. As we skipped over him being given the camera, the scene having been filmed but scrapped, I would have appreciated his POV shot actually being in X-ray. Instead, we just see a safe with a circular blue border around the screen. The fact that Artemis doesn't know the location of the safes in his house baffles me. Sure, it's his dad's business, but to tell me that the kid was capable of kidnapping a fairy, dismantling a time stop, and forcing the Lep to send in a specific dwarf, but not checking behind the paintings in his house, is insane. Also, if Artemis didn't know that the Aculos was in his house, why did he engineer things so that Mulch had to be inside? And if Artemis did know that the Aculos was in his house, why did he engineer things so that Mulch had to be there at all? They've taken the plot of the books and they've smashed it on the ground and tried to stick it back together again. It's gone from being a beautiful, well-oiled machine to just a pile of scraps stuffed into the casing. Artemis frees Holly, as they're such besties now. I can only imagine that she'll leap at the chance to stop Mulch just taking the Aculos and running. Of course, it is the Aculos in the safe. Mulch has to do some fancy hair CGI to open the safe up proper, which is kind of in the spirit of the books, but seems to have a more magic twist to it rather than emphasising just how weird dwarf biology is, which is something that I enjoyed about the books, with the antenna hair and the dehydrated sucker hands and the antiseptic quick hardening saliva. No time for that here. Artemis makes another mention to Holly about him exposing the existence of fairies to the world if she does anything dodgy. She punches him in the face, which does feel more like the Holly I know, but also like inconsistent characterization, and then they're on good terms. Somewhere in there they agree on her being a guest and not a captive now, as the rules of the invitation are clear. I find that laughable. Mulch opens the safe and we get a glimpse of the most powerful treasure in the fairy world, the Aculos, a glowing, hovering golden acorn covered in gnomish letters. The Aculos was coming from inside the house. Holly explains that Artemis can't use it as it'll kill any human that tries, and he says that he should keep it secret from the fairies outside. Mulch says that it's too late, revealing his iris cam. Cudgeon learns that the Aculos has been found and goes off to relay that to Opal, who orders him to intervene. He stages a coup against Root, which he claims has the backing of the executors, and flies in the troll from earlier. Hopped up on a potion, it's feeling strong and angry, ready to tear through the mansion and kill the inhabitants so that they can march in after and scoop the Aculos up. The retrieval of Holly is no longer a priority. In fact, Cudgeon orders all magic in the house jammed, as he thinks that Holly may turn against them like her father supposedly did. In possibly the only joke in this film that I like, Holly asks Butler for her gun back and Mulch hands it over. It seems pretty in character for that to be the case. Outside, a few fairies sit and stand on and by a wall, watching the troll be lowered in. Scale in this film seems a bit weird. Most main fairy characters are just normal height. There doesn't seem to be much of a difference between them and human. And then we occasionally get a glimpse at someone rendered in CGI walking around about knee height for a bit of flavour. Different species obviously have different average heights, and in the books the species are a bit of a mess anyway. It's claimed that there are 8 elves, sprites, dwarves, goblins, pixies, gnomes, gremlins and demons, but we also know that centaurs and trolls exist and that unicorns used to exist but don't anymore, let alone the odd hybrid that's a concept introduced and then quickly forgotten about. I'm not sure if that remains true in the film, and I'm not sure that it matters, but what I would have loved to have seen would be the use of the kind of Lord of the Rings forced perspective techniques that made hobbits look little way back in 2001. Coincidentally when Artemis Fowl was published. A bit of napkin maths to account for inflation says that the portion of the budget that was assigned to the first Lord of the Rings was actually about $10 million more than the budget for Artemis Fowl. But $10 million is the sort of money that Bob Iger can fund personally 20 times over and still have $500 million left in his pockets to play with. What I'm trying to say is that for a film that built an entire mansion from scratch, I don't think budget's the issue. I think it's an unfortunate lack of the will to allow that kind of creativity from Disney's suits, that often the fairies' most defining feature is that they just wear green or grey, which doesn't feel all that magical to me. The troll is blasted into the mansion, battering through the door and a wall, smacking Holly into a chandelier and getting her caught up in it. Butler tries to draw the troll away as it flattens a cage that Holly was previously held in, and it seems like a setup for the best action scene from the books to be brought to screen. Butler donning a suit of armour, taking the troll on and coming out the victor. As Foley and Root watch on astonished, the event becomes legendary under the surface, cementing itself as fodder for viral videos and training material alike. There's still a fight scene in the film. Mulch manages to swallow the Aculos in the chaos and escape, and practically everyone else ends up swinging from the chandelier at some point, even the troll. Butler's not useless. He manages to get in a few jabs on the troll with the horns of the head of a huge bull-shaped chair in the mansion entrance hall, but as he jumps for the chandelier and hits the floor, only to then be crushed by the falling troll as he shoves Artemis out of the way so that we can have a formulaic bit of drama and sadness where nobody really believes that he's going to die, I can't help feeling like we missed out on what could have been. This wasn't exactly legendary, more panic and dumb luck that the chandelier then fell on top of the troll afterwards and took him out. I suppose the first indication that the fight wasn't going to play out as expected was that this version of Fowl Manor doesn't look like the sort of place that would house a suit of armour. I've said before, and I'll say again, how they built a whole thing in Surrey expecting to use it for a full series of films and have now torn it down after the film failed so hard that those plans got scrapped. But I'm almost glad that we didn't see more of it than we had to, because it doesn't really seem like Fowl Manor to me. Fowl Manor is old, a mansion in its own right built into the remains of a medieval castle. It's all huge rooms, dark woods, rugs that cost twice the amount of money anyone make in 2 lifetimes and have been around even longer. It's basically a character, it's old money personified. The Fowls have been ruling Ireland for 1,000 years and this location is exactly what they have to show for it. I understand that would be a huge ask to build for the film, but I'm not expecting them to build it in full. I'd prefer a few sets with the right vibe than a whole mansion that feels like it was just newly constructed by Artemis's dad when he discovered he still had a crypto wallet sitting on an old hard drive and cashed out before the crash, having the bull surfer made as a big middle finger to Wall Street before he starts getting way too into NFTs and is probably going to have to flog it later once his finances all collapse. The place looks nice enough. I like the incorporation of the lighthouse as it's on the coast, but it does not feel like Fowl Manor. And also, I really want to know what happened to that bull seat once everything was torn down, because it's just such a weird piece. The Leb, feeling sympathy for Holly, turn against Cudgeon and unblock her magic so that she might heal herself if she still lives after that troll attack. She uses it on Butler, and he's fine. The scene of Holly healing Butler actually comes before he dons the armour in the books. He's almost killed by the troll at first, ditto for Holly, and it's by chance really that she's able to heal Butler and rejuvenate him for around 2, with a bit of ambiguity as to whether she realises when she's using her healing spell that it's not just directed at herself. Butler has helped to kidnap her. She's not supposed to be so obviously pally-pally. Every scene means so much more in the books as opposed to the film, but that point is ground that I've already trodden with Artemis. While I kind of skim over the healing stuff as I'm not really feeling anything, I notice that Holly's magic is a bit reminiscent of Captain Marvel's powers, and I wonder if any of the same people are involved, or if I'm just misremembering, or if it's coincidence. Big budget movies only seem to have so many ways that they're comfortable representing magic or energy or whatever, and it mostly seems to come out as multicoloured stuff. The time freeze collapses enough that the Lep is told to evacuate, and Mulch meets back up with Artemis, Holly and Butler to reveal to them that he's eaten the Aculos because he's on their team now? He was called in to run a retrieval mission, he's retrieved, I've no idea what he's sticking around for. Maybe it wasn't a time freeze after all, and it was some kind of hitherto unknown make everyone best friends with each other dome. Holly quickly saves a fisherman tossed from his boat by an aggressive wave and about to be caught up in the collapsing of the time stop, implied to be the guy who tattled to MI6, and then tries to make her way out. She gets to the evac point as the time freeze collapses, but turns to watch rather than escape. Mulch actually does burrow away, but it seems everyone's fears were kind of unwarranted. Artemis, Butler and Juliet, who remained within the mansion and didn't escape when the freeze collapsed, are totally fine and unharmed. It's revealed that Mulch must have reached inside his own stomach to pluck the Aculos out, or gone the other way, I'm not sure which is worse. He seemed to hand it over to Artemis with no quibbles before he took his leave, and now Artemis is faced with the choice of handing it over to Opal and getting his dad back but starting a war, or vice versa. It's not as though he can use the Aculos to bring his father back, humans will die if they try. But not fairies. Holly pops back up to say that she'll use it to bring Papa back, provided she can then take it with her afterwards. The two shake hands, affirming that they now have a lifelong bond, and set to action. In order to pump some drama into proceedings, Opal, who had previously declared that Artemis had 3 days to bring her the Aculos, spontaneously decides that time is up, just as Holly is about to start bringing the spell into effect. Without the time stop countdown, we need a new one, I suppose. Holly's spell is perhaps one of the most egregious examples of the movie taking the name of Artemis Fowl, but not really embodying its spirit. Her spell is the first thing that Artemis translates from the Book of the People. Carry me always, carry me well, I am thy teacher of herb and spell, etc. This makes sense in the context of it essentially being a fairy Bible, a book that each of them carry that provides instructions on how to best live their life. It is something that should be carried always, full of information about both botany and magic. In the film, this same rhyme is used because somebody has obviously had a look through the book, but it's just taken completely out of context and therefore doesn't make any sense when Holly is saying these words in order to try and bring the first Artemis back. Carry what always? Carry what well? What is thy teacher of herb and spell? Nobody knows and nobody cares. The Book of the People barely exists in this film, so an attempt now to refer to it in the 11th hour comes just out of nowhere. Just as Opal is about to kill RT1, the film starts lagging to hell again as we circle around Holly. It is another VFX/CGI heavy shot as the Aculos does its wibbly business, so I am suspicious, but at least this time it works out a bit better stylistically, so I'll afford the benefit of the doubt that it was done with some intent, even if maybe it didn't start out that way. Artemis runs around the mansion in a pretty nice tracking shot that showcases how the location was designed for tracking shots from room to room. This is the only one I've actually noticed, which seems like a bit of an underutilization of the concept, but that doesn't mean that others haven't snuck me by, so I'm not deducting any points there. What I will deduct some points for, though, is the fact that Artemis is trying to search for his dad to check that he's been brought back okay. He can't seem to find him, and there's a bit of a commiseration with Holly before Butler notices the golden light spilling forth from the basement. The thing is, the Aculos has been described until this point as basically the granter of whatever you wish. Why couldn't it bring him back? Even if he was killed by Opal, as we see her magic attack him, nobody's ever said that this thing that can teleport people and open interdimensional portals can't raise the dead. The stakes have not been made clear, as everyone's just been so vague about this MacGuffin, so the drama doesn't really hit. It's big first draft energy from a film that we know has been through a fair few more stages of development than that. There's a big old villainous no scream of defeat from Opal. Artemis Fowl confirms to Holly that her dad was a good guy now that he's all safe and sound, until the authorities discover that he's not dead at least, and he hands Holly a list of Opal's accomplices that was given to him by Beechwood. She magics her way back down to Haven, the golden light implying that he's using the Aculos, but no verbal component needed this time, and locks it away with Root, and is then given authorization to search for those names on the list, with the implication that Root will give her a promotion. Meanwhile, the two Artemises gear up to go and confront Opal in person. Little Artemis tells Big Artemis that he's got something working away off screen to deal with the media, and then gives Opal a call informing her that they're coming, referring to himself as a criminal mastermind. He's not really, is he? The whole thing is portrayed as if he had a plan all along, but he's really just done a kidnapping that leads to a dwarf coming in with X-ray specs that found the thing that he needed. That's also portrayed like he knew it would happen all along, but we haven't been shown how. He's not a criminal mastermind because for the millionth time in this video, he's not Artemis Fowl. This Artemis has also been shown to not take kindly to the assertion that his dad is a criminal. Why he wants to take up the mantle now is supposedly character growth in the opposite direction to that of the books, but his character's not really grown and the line is very out of place. He hops into a helicopter with his dad and we cut to Mulch back in the interrogation room. He reveals to the MI6 agent that he's a fairy, showing off his pointy ears that were hidden behind his hair and unhinging his jaw to pull out a tracking device, suggesting that off-screen he was convinced by Artemis to swap the Aculos for the device, get arrested by MI6, and then be rescued later. Why would he agree to being arrested? Well, that was the plan to deal with the media. He threatened MI6 with a fairy invasion if they didn't keep everything under wraps. The idea is that MI6 would be so scared to learn of the existence of fairies and have no idea what they could do, so they'd agree to those terms to keep the peace. Why Mulch, the famously self-serving thief, would decide that any of this was a smart idea is beyond me. Why he is remotely invested in whether the media allow Artemis I to go free is beyond my understanding. Sure, he may want to make sure that there's no human-fairy war, and threatening the Secret Service may be a way to stop that from happening. But that's a huge gamble to take, considering that they didn't actually know about the existence of fairies until he just got arrested and told them. The best way to make sure that humans don't interact with fairies is to make sure the humans don't know about the fairies. That's why the Lep wanted the troll rounded up ASAP, and that's the entire reason that Opal was even a threat. Every black and white bit of this film that Mulch has been involved in, set up as the bookends, like a great big twist introduced before anything else and revealed at the end, is pointless. It's nonsense. I'm glad it's over, as the Fowls fly their helicopter in, drop a ladder in through the unguarded, conveniently glass roof of the sea fort, and fly him out, to be joined by Holly as they all head towards the Opal Cowboy sequel bait in the sunset that we're never going to get, and that I'm simultaneously very sad and so happy about. Unfortunately, that's not actually the end. Disney released some deleted scenes from the movie, some of which have been cut for time, and I agree they should have been, such as Cudgeon making his position against negotiation in favour of a direct attack even more clear, as well as Root fretting about the negotiation a bit more. Some which maybe I would have liked to have seen, such as Holly actually showcasing the different settings of her weapon, but I don't mind it not being in the film and could pick it up as we went along anyway. Some which thankfully they seem to have realised were a horrendous idea to begin with, such as Artemis one-wheeling away from the troll during the fight, though I don't understand why they left the one wheel in if they removed the callback. And some that fit with the plot of the book a lot more, such as a scene in which Artemis actually does explain the invitation when ordering Holly about, but then tries it on Mulch and it has no effect as he's got no magic. This is the sort of thing that would benefit the film to be included, no doubt, as its removal just makes things more confusing and 10 times worse. I can only guess that it was removed because Artemis was coming across too manipulative for their liking, straying a little too far into original book territory. But instead, what we got was a kind of crater of a plot point that had to be assembled from the tidbits left around it. There are yet more scenes, though, that correspond to the books but wouldn't actually make sense to be included in the film due to the change in plot. Some of these come from a tie-in book called Artemis Fowl, A Fowl Adventure. It's supposed to turn the film, an adaptation of a book, back into book form, which is a slightly weird concept on its own. But what's weirder is that it doesn't do that. It relays a slightly different plot, still involving Opal Cowboy kidnapping Artemis's dad, but ordering him to bring her a ton of fairy gold, which spurs him to travel to Ho Chi Minh City, find out about fairies in the Book of the People, and kidnap one Holly Short, who is an island performing the ritual to restore her magic and ransom her, eventually having to work with her to try and avoid a biobomb that's going to be sent in after the Lep decide that Holly's life isn't worth the money. The Aculos is only a minor thing that distracts Mulch when he's sent in to try and retrieve her first. It all sounds way closer to the original book, so why is it here in what is meant to be a movie novelization? It's because they filmed it. This was the original version of the film before it was delayed by 8 to 9 months. It's backed up by pictures from the book of the scenes, including one where Artemis is by the pile of gold, shaped like acorns for a bit of fairy flair, and potentially why the Aculos is acorn-shaped. Maybe not, but they would coincidentally provide some pretty good reference if not. It's not just backed up by the pictures though. The movie gives thanks to Ho Chi Minh City as a filming location despite it not being included in the film. But they did film there, it's in the trailers and it was released onto Disney Plus as a deleted scene. All of this, paired with the fact that most mentions of the Aculos in the film are blatantly ADR'd in after the fact, starts to paint a picture. They adapted the book slightly, made the movie, maybe showed it to Owen Colfer who seemed to like it. Something happened, maybe it didn't test well with audiences, we're probably never going to know. Folk came in and meddled extensively, cutting, rewriting, reshooting, hastily bashing out some VFX that didn't get finished on time. COVID happened, and they spat it out onto Disney Plus, a shell of what it once was. Part of me wants that original version, but I'm not going to go all #release the Branagh cut on you, because it probably wasn't great. I doubt it was very funny, the casting would still be a bit dodgy, the unnecessary addition of the Opal motivation likely still wouldn't feel right, and we know from the casting call long before the film started shooting that they were dead set on bending Artemis's personality so it fit a more marketable mould. He still travels in a public plane as opposed to a private jet in that Ho Chi Minh City, for Christ's sake. But maybe it wouldn't have been the worst film I've ever seen. The true worst part, though, is that it's Disney. They've no motivation to sell the rights on and get upstaged by someone else making something much better. They'll just absorb the losses with another Marvel movie and keep trucking, simultaneously letting Artemis Fowl be forgotten, but still clinging to it and ordering every unofficial attempt at adaptation to cease and desist or be sued to hell and back. Regardless of why they made the changes, Disney ruined Artemis Fowl through a mixture of greed, incompetence, and sheer lack of care. Do not watch this movie.